Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best build for all 66 brawlers right now, of course, with Willow as well coming into the game next week. We'll be taking a look at all the best star powers, gadgets, and gears to use. So even though I did this like a month ago or so, a lot of people asked this question the most in my comment section and wanted to see it. So of course, I'll bring that to you guys. So before we jump into it, make sure you're using a create code. That'd be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, let's hop into it. So as always, we're going to be starting off with Shelly, working our way up to the chromatics. So starting off with Shelly, of course, clay pigeon is going to be by far the better gadget to use, and then depending on the map and situation, most of the time I use shell shock, but if maybe you use Shelly on like a really inconvenient game mode, I don't know, like bounty for example, then band-aid might actually be pretty underrated. Gears pretty much all the time where Shelly is good. You're going to be using the speed gear, and then really up to you whether you want to use damage or the shield. I use damage just because you get a lot more damage if you chain your supers. So with Nita, both gadgets can actually be pretty useful. We've seen bear paws work quite a few times in heist, or if you're facing off maybe against a brawler like a tank, like Buzz or something, to interrupt their stun, then that can be pretty good to actually save you. But most of the time, you want to be using this gadget because it will give you that extra bit of HP. And then depending on the game mode, Hyper Bear in heist, everywhere else you want to use Bear with me. Next up, we have Colt. So with the unbreakable walls, you don't get as much value out of Silver Bullet anymore, but I still think it's the better gadget overall, just because it can help you clear up even more room to score a goal. Even though Speed Loader can be really good in heist still, especially on some maps like Safe Zone, you may as well just use Speed Loader. And the next one, so in terms of star power, then it can just depend on what Colt you are. I'll use Magnum Special because it's a little bit easier to hit shots, but if you want to juke more easier, then Slick Boost is the way to go. And then pretty much all of the time I use the damage and the reload speed gear. So next up we have Ball. So in terms of gadgets, T-Bone Injectors are only really good in heist in my opinion. I do actually use it quite often, but in terms of Stomper, it's going to be better overall, because of course Ball Super, you can't stop it without it, so you can confirm kills really easy with that gadget. But in terms of star power, it depends what ball player you are. I often use Tough Guy, especially even in heist. I just like being able to stay alive and cause a nuisance to the enemy team. But Berserker you can get a lot of value out of, especially because there's a 60% health threshold. And then in terms of gadgets and well, in terms of gears, then speed gear is going to be the better overall, but of course non-grassy map you want to be using probably the health and the damage gear. So next up we have Brock. So his gadgets are really difficult to choose between right now, just because unbreakable walls you're not going to get as much value out of rocket fuel, but still a lot of times I do often use it, especially in competitive when I'm trying to counter a certain brawler like Rico for example, or throwers. Rocket fuel is going to be better, but rocket laces is going to be really good against aggro compositions, or just maybe just to juke certain things like a gene pool for example. So both really viable gadgets right now. In terms of star power, rocket number 4 is my go-to star power. You know, this one's pretty underrated sometimes in game modes like Brawl, but you just get a lot more value more often with rocket number 4. And then pretty much all of the time I'll be using the damage gear and the reload gear. So next up we have El Primo. So El Primo's build is pretty balanced. Both gadgets and star powers are good. So Suplex Supplement is really good, especially against enemy tanks, or maybe against like a Buzz for example. If he wants to stun you, you can just gadget and get rid of that stun. But Asteroid Belt is really good for pressure, really good at countering like throws for example, and just opening up the map in general to counter certain brawlers. Then in terms of star powers, El Fuego is really good with the brand new buff to his super damage. With one super you can deal 2,600 damage I believe, which is pretty good. But then in Brawl, this star power is really good at allowing you just to cycle your super much quicker. Then in terms of gears then, so a lot of times I actually like to use speed and the supercharged gear, but there's literally an argument for both damage and the health gear as well. He's got 4 super viable gears. Next up we have Barley. So he actually has a really balanced build as well. So we've got Sticky Syrup Mixer, which is of course really good against enemy tanks, but if you're not facing off against tanks, maybe if you're just facing off against another thrower, and Herbal Tonic is really good in it, especially gives it value to you and your teammates as well. And then in terms of star powers, a lot of times I use Extra Nauseous, but there are some uses where this star power is going to be better. You know, against enemy throwers this could be really good, because then you don't get pushed back as much because you're constantly healing every time you're throwing out a shot. Then in terms of gears, maybe on grassy maps you still get value out of a speed gear, but for the most part you're going to be using the damage and the shield gear. So next up we have Poco. So 2 actually really good gadgets right now. Tuning Fork is going to be good a lot of times, especially on ladder, healing up you and your teammates around you, especially early on in the games. And then Protective Tunes actually going to be really good in this meta, because it's going to remove a lot of adverse effects like Otis is mute, and you've also got like lose freeze, for example. You've got a lot of meta brawlers which this gadget crows slow as well, that this gadget completely removed, so really good in Power League as well. But in terms of star powers, I think both of them are really good. I think Da Capo is actually pretty underrated right now, really strong in game modes like Hot Zone, but then also if you're just a really aggressive Poco and you're facing off against a squisher composition, then Screeching Solo is going to be really good at confirming kills. And then again, depending on the map and the scenario, most time you'll be using the speed and damage, but of course on those non-grassy maps, maybe on open zone, you'll be using the damage and the shield gear. So next up we have a Rosa. So in terms of gadgets, it really depends on scenario. So pretty much all of the time in gem grab, you actually want to use the grow light gadget, because what it'll do, you can a lot of times you can just put bushes in the middle near where your gem carrier is, and it makes it a lot easier for your gem carrier to avoid damage and get gems a lot easier. But unfriendly bush is going to be better most of the time, especially on maps like Sneaker Fields. You know, gadgeting the entire enemy team, slowing them down, is going to make it really easy to catch up to them and take them down. And then in terms of star powers, so most time you're going to use Plant Life, but in a few scenarios, especially against like Ash, for example, Thorny Gloves is going to be the better star power. And then pretty much all of the time you're going to be using the speed and damage gear. So next up we have Jessie. So Jessie actually has two viable gadgets. Spark Plug is going to be better once you start climbing the trophies. It's really strong at confirming kills and just slowing opponents to make it a lot easier to gain control. But Recall Spring is really easy to use, especially lower down on heists in general. You can get a lot of damage with it. So if left alone, that can get a ton of damage. And in terms of star powers, Energize is going to be by far the better star power. And in terms of gears, again, dependent on the map, but pretty much all of the time I use speed and damage, because a lot of times with Jessie, I like to actually use her as like a shotgun brawler. So speed really helps me close the gap and get some really good damage. Next up we have Dyna. So stuff hasn't changed whatsoever here. Fidget Spinner is only really good to mess around. Satchel Charge is actually one of the best gadgets in the game, so incredibly strong. But in terms of star powers, of course Demolition is going to be by far the better one. Really good at countering those squishy brawlers, just one-shotting them with a super. And then pretty much all of the time you want to be using the damage and the shield gear. But on a grassy map, I think speed gear is definitely needed. So next up we have Tick. So Tick has one really good gadget and one bad one. Last Horizon is going to be really good at tanking high damage shots, not only at pushing back the opponent when they are close to you, can be really good at survivability. And then star powers, well oiled is going to be the better one for the most part. And sometimes you can use automatic. I find it sometimes useful, especially if you're not facing against an enemy thrower on like knockout or bounty. And then in terms of gears, then I've never switched off the mythic gear and the shield gear. Next up we have 8-bit. So 8-bit has two useful gadgets. Cheat Cartridge is going to be the better gadget in every single game mode except for heist. It's going to allow you to TP back to your super and stay alive in really clutch scenarios, whereas extra credit is going to be really good in heist to get some insane damage. You pair this with your super, it's going to get some really good damage, and you pair it with boosted booster in particular, which again is going to be the better star power in heist, because the amount of damage you can put out is just insane. You can literally full clip so many tanks with this star power. And then with plugged in, it's going to be better in probably gem grab or other game modes where you want to survive a little bit better, giving you additional speed. And then it's up to you what you pick in terms of gears. You can get value out of pretty much all of them. I tend to go with damage and also the reload speed gear when it comes down to heist, but maybe if you're playing gem grab, probably like speed and vision could be pretty solid as well. Next up we have Rico. So in terms of his gadgets and star powers, pretty simple. Bouncy Castle is going to be by far the better one. The other gadget is literally useless. And then in terms of star powers, Super Bounce is going to be by far the better one. Getting increased damage is really vital, allowing him just to become a really strong brawler. And then in terms of gears, you can see here I've got literally every single gear except for health. Health is actually pretty good on Rico as well, so all of them are useful. It depends on the map scenario. You know, if there's a bunch of bushes, of course speed's going to be pretty good. You know, even if it's like a ton, I may even switch to like reload, vision and speed. And then on the, of course, the like knockout maps like Belle's Rock, I'll probably opt for maybe like this type of build or reload as well. I know there's a lot of playing about you can do. Next up we have Darryl. So in terms of gadgets, both of them are pretty useful in some ways. Recall and rotate is going to be better in heist, allowing you to cycle super a lot more and also get some good damage onto the safe. But Top Barrel is going to be a really strong gadget if you can get that first super pretty quickly. So if you're scared of getting that first super, taking a long while, and of course use Recall and Rotator. But in terms of star powers, every single time steal hoops, unless maybe you're playing it on a base race map like Pit Stop for example, then this star power may help you out a little bit. Then again, just depends on what type of map you're playing on, but for the most part, I'll probably be using the damage and the health gear. So next up we have Penny. So the gadget is pretty simple. Sight barrel all of the time is really going to help you out against those tankier brawlers. And then in terms of star powers then, so a lot of times I use heavy coffers just because it allows you to get additional splash damage, and it pairs with salty barrel a little bit better. But if for example you're playing a lot of brawlable and there's just so many assassin brawlers, you know, Mortis, Buzz, Darryl, all of these brawlers, this star power can actually be really clutch. And if you play a good Penny, this star power is going to really clutch up in getting the ball away from those assassins. And then in terms of gears, again, just depending on the scenario that you're in, you know, it's good to have pretty much all of these except for the health gear. Next up we have Colt. So in terms of gadgets, flying hook 100% of the time, and then pretty much 99% of the time protective pirouette is the go-to, just because it allows you to become such a strong assassin brawler. Then in terms of gears, again, the same type of thing I say every single time. On those grassy maps, speed is really good. You know, some people like the health gear on Colt because it can help him be really aggressive. Some people like the shield gear because if you're super aggressive with Colt, dying a lot, then of course shield gear is going to be pretty good. And then damage you can get a lot of value with as well. Next up we have Jacky. So in terms of gadgets, the first gadget is going to be by far the better one. Rebuild used to be okay, but now with unbreakable walls, I feel like you don't need it. Maybe there's a few maps where it's super useful. You'll have to let me know whether you know any, but I can't off the top of my head. In terms of star powers, counter crush is going to be by far the better star power, allowing you to get that additional damage, which Jacky definitely needs. Then in terms of gears, 100% speed and damage. Next up we have Gus. So super simple right here. Cookie Popper 100% of the time, and Spirit Animal 100% of the time. That's going to be by far the best build for him. And then again, depending on the scenario, grassy maps go with the vision and the speed. On non-grassy maps, go with damage and the shield. Next up we have Bo. So his super totem recently got reworked. I think it's the better gadget right now, especially in game modes like gem grab and Brawl. You're still going to get a lot of value out of it. It's not as broken as before, but still pretty good. And then star power, Snare Bear is going to be the better star power by far, unless you're playing a super grassy map. I'm talking probably like double swoosh, for example. And then in terms of gears, reload speed gear 100% of the time, and then it's pretty much up to you. Damage gear can be really good if you're playing on a non-grassy map, but if it's just so much grass, vision gears can be really good on a brawler like Bo. Next up we have Ems. So Friend Zoner is used 100% of the time for me, really good at confirming kills and also stopping you getting countered by those aggro brawlers. And then Hype I use all of the time just because it allows you to be a lot more aggressive and of course stay within that really threatening positioning, allowing you to heal up. And then pretty much all of the time I use the speed and the damage gear. So next up we have Stu. So it's got two good gadgets, two good star powers. So Speed Zone is going to be better on those defensive maps like Backyard Bowl, but also maybe like Open Zone, Hot Zone. A lot of the times this gadget's going to be the better one. But if you're looking to be a really good assassin, Breakthrough is going to be really good at confirming kills and being super aggressive. Gas the Heal I use like 99% of the time. Maybe on some matchups, Zero Drag might be better. Maybe against some certain sharpshooters, maybe on Knockout, for example. But then in terms of gears, pretty much damage and the shield gear is going to be better a lot of the time. But I think shield's definitely the most valuable. And then maybe speed if it's a grassy map. So next up we have Piper. So auto aimers are really good against those aggro brawlers, but I use this most of the time on gem grab and Brawl because of course our biggest counters are those real assassin brawlers, so that's going to be good at countering them. And then Homemade Recipe is really strong on Knockout and also on Bounty to confirm those kills. In terms of star power, Snappy Snapping's by far the better star power. Ever since Power 11's got introduced, this star power got less value because the additional damage didn't actually get buffed as well. So Snappy Sniping is going to be a lot better. Then in terms of the map, again, it just depends on world gears. It depends on what map's being played, whether it's grassy or not. Next up, we have Pam. So after playing Pam for like 5,000 hours, I think by far the better build for her is going to be Scrap Sucker, by far the better gadget, and Mama Squeeze, by far the better star power. In terms of gears, this is pretty much the gears I used every single time. Speed and vision. Vision is so strong on Pam. Next up, we have Frank. So I use Irresistible Attraction all of the time with Frank. I know this gadget can be really good at his counters, well, like countering his counters, but this one's going to be really good at allowing him to get that additional damage, which he definitely needs. But in terms of star powers, Sponges use all of the time, and gears, it depends. Grassy map, you can use speed, and then elsewhere I use the health and the damage gear. Next up we have Bibi. So in terms of gadgets, The best one by far is going to be Vitamin Booster, allowing you to heal up every 4 seconds. It's really strong. And then in terms of star powers, I actually like Home Run a lot better right now. I don't know about you guys, but Stance can be good on grassy maps. If you want to pair this with like the speed gear, that can be really good. But on a more open map, Home Run's going to be really good at dodging, allowing you to dodge and get closer to the enemies. And then of course you want to use the damage and the shield gear. Next up we have B. So in terms of gadgets, Honey Molasses is by far the better gadget. Star powers, I see this debate a lot in my comment section. All pros use Honeycomb, every single one. It's the better star power, but that's without saying Insta-B load is a really good star power to have as well. It depends what type of B player you are, because it takes a little bit more skill to get value out of Honeycomb. It just allows you to be a lot tankier and get into much better positions, and especially in game modes like Hot Zone, it allows you to stay alive a lot longer on the zone. And then in terms of gears, you have the damage and the shield, which is going to be really good on those non-grassy maps. So next up we have Nani. So in terms of gadgets, nothing has changed. Return to sender on game modes like Knockout and Bounty, where you're going to be wanting to use your head to confirm kills a lot more. But on game modes like Heist, for example, you want to be swapping to this build where you use your Nani peeps to get in behind onto the enemy safe, or just maybe in Brawl Ball to make a fun play. And then in terms of gears, again, just depends on what map you play on. You want to use Supercharge all of the time though. It depends whether it's a grassy map, whether you need to tank more shots with the shield gear, or whether you want to just get so much damage with the damage gear. So next up we have Edgar. So in terms of gadgets, Hardcore is going to be the better gadget overall, because Edgar's really squishy, so allowing him to have that extra shield is really going to help him out in some 1v1s. And then fisticuffs as well, allowing you just to heal up that little bit quicker. Then in terms of gears, pretty much all of the time I like to use the shield and the supercharged gear, even though 10% isn't a lot. I just like it because Edgars are stuck without super a lot of the time. So of course, giving him super a little bit faster may help him out. So next up we have Griff. So in terms of gadgets, Piggy Bank's going to be better overall, but there's a lot of unbreakable walls right now on maps which Griff used to be good on. So you may as well just use Coin Shower on those maps, even though this gadget isn't the best. In terms of star powers, business resilience pretty much all of the time, and then gears, reload speed gear all of the time, and then depending on the scenario, but most time I use the damage gear. Next up we have Grom. So in terms of gadgets, Watchtower is going to be good on grassy maps where you want to make sure no opponents are sneaking up on you, like sneaky fields and double swoosh. But for the most part on maps which Grom's going to be really strong on, radio check is going to be the better gadget, allowing you to confirm the kills quickly, especially on knockout and bounty. X Factor by far the better star power, giving you increased damage. And then again, it can depend on what map you play on, but all these three gears are the ones I change between. Next up we have Bonnie. So 100% Sugar Rush all of the time, and Black Powder as well. The other gadget and star power literally some of the worst in the game. And then in terms of gears, there's a lot of gears that you can actually go to. It depends on the map. I like health gear and the damage gear a lot of the time. Next up we have Mortis. So the best gadget by far is Survival Shovel, even though in some scenarios combo spinning might actually be quite useful, especially against like tickets for example, but Survival Shovel is going to really help you build up super a lot easier. And then in terms of star power, Creepy Harvest is going to be the better one overall, but you can still make some really aggressive plays with Cold Snake. It depends how good of a Mortis you are, and then depending on the scenario, most of the time though you want to use damage and shield. So next up we have Tara. So all of the time I'll use support from Beyond. There isn't really a map which I would actually prefer using this gadget. But in terms of star powers, I use Healing Shade a lot of the time, but if you're facing off against a lot of single shot brawlers, then Black Portal can definitely help you out in those 1v1s. And then on the maps that Tara are good on, it depends on what Tara player you are. If you want that extra damage, which you probably needs right now, I'd probably prefer this one, but on maps like Double Swoosh, I think Vision Gear is essential. Next up we have Jean. So in terms of gadgets, Lamp Blowout is going to be the one I use pretty much all of the time, but more open maps or maybe game modes like Bounty, Vengeful Spirits can be pretty good to finish off kills or keep opponents low. Then in terms of star powers, Magic Puffs of course going to be the better one by far, and gears, I never switch off the Mythic Gear and also the Vision Gear. Next up we have Max. So in terms of gadgets, Phase Shifter by far the better one. Star powers, I always like to kind of switch up things. Supercharged I use most of the time, but Run and Gun is still a really good star power as well, so both of them are really useful to have. It depends on the scenario and what type of max player you are. And in terms of gears, you can see I've got every single gear. All of them are really useful on max, but if I was to pinpoint two gears that you're going to get value out of all of the time, then damage and health for sure. Next up we have Mr.p. His star power and gadget don't really help him out too much, but Service Bell is going to be a little bit better. When you pop that gadget, it gives your porter a little bit more HP and more damage, just helps to waste ammo even more. Same with Revolving Door. The extra HP allows to waste more opponents from the opponents, and of course that's what you want to do with your super. and then it's up to you what you really go. To be fair, any gears don't really help him out too much, but for the most part, damage and shield will help him out. Next up, we have Sprout. So transplant is going to be the gadget which you use pretty much all of the time, and then depending on the map, maybe if it's a really grassy map, photosynthesis of course going to give you that extra shield, but overgrowth is going to be the star power which most people use, because Sprout is normally used on non-grassy maps like Belle's Rock, especially dominating in knockout right now. And then supercharge gear all of the time. It makes it so before it used to take 5 shots to get Sprout super. With this gear, it takes 4 shots to get Sprout super, so of course it's going to help him out a lot to cycle those walls. And then it can depend on what kind of Sprout you are. A lot of times I actually like the damage gear. So next up we have a Byron. So in terms of gadgets, both are pretty useful. I like booster shots just because it allows you to cycle your super a little bit easier, but definitely this gadget is good as well. All of the time I use melees just because it can be really annoying for the enemies to stop that healing for an additional like 6 seconds. And then in terms of gears, pretty much all the time I use the damage and the shield gear. For Squeak, it's pretty easy. Residue 100% of the time, and then super sticky 100% of the time as well. In terms of gears, pretty much damage and shield you're going to get value with all of the time. So now moving on to Grey. So in terms of gadgets, Walking Cane is going to be the better one by far. It allows you to pull the opponents closer to you so you can take them down much quicker, and also it breaks open walls and just gets that additional damage. So really good gadget to have. New perspective is going to be really good. If you keep cycling through your super, it's going to give you that additional HP. And then in terms of gears, again, just depends on what map you play. So now moving on to Spike, starting off with the gadget Life Plant 100% of the time. And then I'm seeing a lot more use for fertilizer right now, especially if you're facing off against tanks. Because Spike is really squishy, it's going to allow him to heal up a lot more. But for the most part, curveballs are a lot more effective, especially on those grassy maps or just any type of kind of grass. It's going to really allow you to scout the opponents. You pair this with a vision gear, it's going to be super strong. And then the mythic gear as well is incredibly strong right now. So next up we have a Crow. Super simple build right here. We have slowing toxin 100% of the time and extra toxic pretty much all of the time. Maybe on heist you want to switch to this one, but I still use extra toxic. And then in terms of gears, on the maps which Crow is really strong on, speed gear and the mythic gear is going to be the better combination. Next up we have a Leon. So the lollipop drop is going to be by far the better gadget. And then in terms of star powers, a lot of the time I like Invisi Heal, but sometimes you can get some really quick assassin kills with smoke trails, especially if you combine this with a brand new mythic gear. It allows for a lot more plays with smoke trails. But in terms of gears, a lot of times I like to use the speed gear as well paired with the mythic gear. So next up we have Sandy. So Sweet Dreams 100% of the time allows you to get some really clutch plays in Brawl. And then Rude Sands is going to be better pretty much all of the time. Maybe if you're on a super open map, then you might go for healing winds, but Rude Sands is just really strong in a lot of different areas. And then pretty much all of the time I go with the speed and the damage gear. So next up we have Amber. So 5 stars is going to be by far the better gadget. The other one is useless. And then Wild Flames pretty much all of the time. It's just the way you play Amber. Cycling your supers is the best way to play her. And then in terms of gears, it depends on the map and situation, but you want to use a reload gear all of the time, and then it depends which other gear you want to switch to. So next up we have Meg. So in terms of gadgets, Jolting Bolts is going to be the better one overall. There are some scenarios where I've seen Toolbox useful just literally to tank enemy shots, you know. For example, if I'm facing off against like a Piper or a Bee, this one can be good just to save your life a little bit sometimes. And then in terms of gears, you can see here I use the damage and the shield gear all of the time. So moving on to the final legendary, we have Chester. So Chester, I think that Candy Beans is by far the better gadget right now, just because Chester's supers aren't really too strong. All of them are a bit mediocre, so it doesn't really matter which one you have. Candy Beans is going to allow you to get some really good boosts. And then of course Bella Mania by far the better star power. But a lot of the time right now I actually like to use the speed and damage gear combination, because of course Chester got a damage nerf, so just being able to burst down opponents quicker is the best way to play Chester. So now we're moving on to the chromatic brawlers, starting off with Gale. So Gale, he has 2 useful gadgets in some ways. You know, Spring Ejector can help you get up the map a lot quicker in some scenarios like Kaboom Canyon for example, but Twister is going to really help you counter those assassins like Mortis and Buzz. In terms of star powers, on a map with a lot of walls, Blustery Blow is going to be by far the better star power, but on open maps, Freeze and Snow can actually be super strong, and then combine this with the speed and the damage gear for the most part. Now moving on to Surge Fence. So for the most part you want to be using Power Shield. It's one of the best gadgets in the game by far. Maybe if you're playing Power League and the enemy comp looks to kind of counter you out by a lot of range, then Power Surge can help you get up your levels, but Power Shield on ladder is insane. serve ice cold 100% of the time. And in terms of gears, I like to swap between pretty much all the time that I use speed, just because it helps you in your first form. And then it depends on the matchup, but damage gear can be pretty strong. But overall, shield gear giving you additional health is super essential for Surge. Next up, we have Colette. So all of the time you want to use Gotcha allows you, especially when you're weak, to then heal up from the opponents. And then depending up against whether you face tanks or probably the game mode more likely. So on like Brawl Ball or Gem Grab, you want to use Push It. But if you know for certain you're not facing off against tanks, then Mass Attack is going to be the better star power, especially on Heist. And then all of the time I use the damage and the shield gear. So for Lu, it's really simple. The second gadget by far is the better one, and Hypothermia as well. There's no debates about this. And then Supercharge as well, I use all of the time on Lu. It allows you to cycle your super with only 6 hits instead of 7. It's just the main reason why he's even viable in the meta right now. And then all of the time I use the damage gear, but of course you can definitely switch between pretty much all of them are really useful on Lu. So now moving on to Ruffs. So take cover is going to be good against those single shot brawlers like Surge or like B, for example. But if you know for a fact you're not facing them, especially in Power League, Air Support is just going to be better. It allows you to push the opponents back, allowing you to get map control, and it's just a lot easier when you be really aggressive with Ruffs, so the gadget can help you out. Air Superiority, maybe on some maps where you don't get value out of it, you can switch to the other star power, but you only really want to use Field Promotion on more passive game modes like Bounty and Knockout, because that's where you're going to get the most value out of it. And then there's a lot of different gears you can use, of course, depending on the map. So now moving on to Belle's. So both gadgets can be pretty useful. Nest Egg is going to be really strong on certain game modes like Hot Zone, where you can literally put these traps inside of a zone, and once they of course go over it, it's going to allow you to get some really good control. Reverse Polarity can be sometimes good in like Knockout and Bounty to confirm kills. Normally this one's just more of a fun gadget. And then in terms of star powers, of course, Positive Feedback by far the better one. Reload speed gear all of the time, and then depending on what you want to really do with Belle or what map, you can use pretty much all of the other gears. So now we have a Buzz. So the first gadget is going to be pretty good literally everywhere. Allows you to get a free super, so maybe if you miss your stun super, you can then use this one, and especially just to kind of maneuver around a map, it's really good. X-ray shades is actually really underrated on those grassy maps. You know, you may feel like sometimes that you know where the opponents are if they're automatically charging your super, which just makes it a lot easier for you and your teammates to know where the opponents are. Can be really good. And then in terms of star powers, by far the better one is Eyes Sharp. The only way I use this star power is maybe against like other tanks like Ash, for example, just so it allows you to take them down a little bit quicker. Then in terms of this gears, of course, it just depends on what kind of map you play on. So now we have Ash. In terms of gadgets, every single time Chill Pill. Then in terms of star powers, I use First Bash all of the time, by far the better one. And in terms of gears, I think all of the pros right now are using speed and damage, but you could definitely make an argument for the health gear as well. But this is what the pros use pretty much all of the time. So next up we have Lola. Super simple with her build. Freeze frame 100% of the time, allows you to tank those single shots really well and just waste opponent ammo really well. And in terms of star powers, this star power is going to allow you to get additional damage, which of course is really good with Lola. You pair this for the reload speed gear, you pair this with the damage gear as well, it's going to be really good, but you can also get value out of the speed and vision as well with Lola. So next up we have Fang. So by far the better gadget. Roundhouse Kick allows you to get a stun and finish off the opponent much quicker. Divine Soul is going to be the star power which you use pretty much all of the time. Maybe on a super open map you might be able to get some fun plays with fresh kicks, but Divine Souls, competitively speaking, is by far the better option. And then whenever I play Fang, I think this is pretty much the best build. Or if it's on a grassy map, I switch out the damage gear for the speed gear. So next up we have Eve. So the best gadget by far is Gotta Go. It's really good and competitive right now, especially if you're looking to dodge the likes of Mandy supers in Bounty and Knockout. Gene pools, it's just good for survivability. And in terms of star powers, I see some people using Happy Surprise. It can be pretty good against like Gene and B, for example, but I still like to use Unnatural Order. It just allows you to get quicker damage. And then in terms of gears, you can see here I've got literally all of them. Of course, reload speed gear all of the time, and then just depending on the scenario, depending on the matchup, you can switch throughout the gears. So next up we have Janet and her gadget. So Drop the Base is going to be by far the better gadget, just because it stops the enemy regen. It helps scout grass as well. It's just a really annoying gadget to face off against, whilst Backstage Pass is actually pretty underrated. Really good at making aggressive plays. You're thinking about knockout, or just if you want to counter throws that a little bit harder. Backstage pass can be pretty good. I use vocal warm-up pretty much all the time. I've seen sometimes in the World Finals stage view used, maybe on maps like Sneaky Fields, but still I like vocal warm-up. And then again, just depending on the map you play, you can switch between all of these gears. Next up, we have Otis. So 100% of the time, the second gadget is used over the first one. It allows you just to be really annoying. It can be helpful to scout the grass, and also just to stop the enemy regen. And you know, your gadget them once can be pretty strong. Then ink refills 100% of the time. This should literally be a baseline at star power. In terms of gears, it can really be up to you. I like to switch between all of them. I don't know why. Supercharged gear can sometimes be good, but then a lot of times you play grassy maps, so this combination can be solid as well. So now we're moving on to Sam, starting off with his gadget Magnetic Field. By far the better gadget to have. Really good at helping to stun the opponents so you can get closer to them. Hard to recovery, by far the better star power. And then again, up to you. A lot of times I like to use the shield gear just because it helps him stay alive a little bit better, and then damage can be really useful a lot of the time. So next up we have a Buster. So by far the better gadget is slow-mo replay. It allows you to pull enemies closer towards you, and then you can get more damage, and also you have the slow effect. It's one of the best gadgets in the game. And then in terms of star powers, both of them aren't really too useful right now, just because this star powers used to be really strong when his super duration used to be 6 seconds. It's not anymore, so I don't know, both can actually be pretty solid overall. And then in terms of gears, I think this is the best gears to use. So now moving on to Mandy. So in terms of gadgets, both gadgets can be useful. Caramelize can be really good, especially if combined with the super, and also good at countering tanks, but you still got to hit the shot to get the slow with Mandy. So of course it can be a little bit awkward sometimes. Cookie Crumbs can be a really good surprise gadget to have, especially on some maps with a lot of walls. You can use this gadget to confirm kills pretty easily. And then again, depending on the map which you play on, you can pick between all of these gears. So next up we have RT and his gadgets and star powers. So Hacks came into the game yesterday, but it's by far the better gadget. It's actually a really strong gadget, especially at countering sharpshooters. You just need to two-shot them and then gadget them, and then you can kill them every single time. Whereas this gadget's the worst gadget in the game, terrible. And in terms of star powers, both can be pretty useful. So quick maths can sometimes be pretty useful on some scenarios, whereas recording can be really good, especially if you're looking to split from your super a lot of the time. It's going to give you 20% extra health, which is really strong. And then again, depending on what map you play on, all of these gears are useful. And lastly, we have a Willow, which is coming into the game in a week's time. But in terms of gadgets, the first one's going to be by far the better gadget in my opinion. It allows you to get instant damage straight away, which Willow of course can't deal damage straight away. She deals it in poison ticks, so this is going to be really good. And an extra 500 damage. It's actually going to be a really broken gadget. Then in terms of star powers, I'm actually interested to try this one out. To be honest, both of them feel a little bit awkward. I mean, you get a lot more value out of this one just because it takes so long to get her super. But then, of course, when you get her super, Obsession can feel really strong. 75% movement speed. That's one of the biggest buffs. I think you'd be absolutely rapid with this star power. So in terms of gears as well, I think for most throwers, this combination will be much better. Alright guys, it's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think of this video. I know not much has really changed, but you guys just seem to ask for it a lot. There's only probably a couple of changes to it, but at least this will be really helpful when you're looking to upgrade some brawlers. So that's going to be it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.